The morning my brother called to say my mother had collapsed. I was standing in the parking lot of my office building, car keys in one hand, and a coffee I hadn't touched in the other. I remember thinking, "Why she needs me?" And then I hated myself for thinking it. I drove 4 hours to get to that hospital. I didn't eat. I didn't stop except once for gas. I kept my phone on speaker the whole way, waiting for updates, getting none. When I walked through those ER doors and saw my mother sitting up in a hospital bed, fully conscious, irritated about the IV in her arm, I nearly cried with relief. She looked at me and said, "You didn't have to come all this way. Not thank you. Not I'm so glad you're here, just, you didn't have to." I should have taken that as a sign. I didn't. My name is Willa. I'm 32 years old. For the past 11 years I have been the financial backbone of my family, and I didn't fully understand that until the day they showed me exactly how little I mattered to them in return. Let me back up. My parents divorced when I was 16. My father remarried quickly, a woman who had 2 kids of her own, and more or less disappeared into that new life. My mother raised my younger brother and me mostly alone, and she was not quiet about the sacrifice. Every birthday, every Christmas, every ordinary Tuesday we heard about it. How hard she worked. How much she gave up. How we owed her everything. I believed her. I was 16. You believe your mother. When I got my first real job at 21, entry level, nothing impressive, $38,000 a year in a mid-sized city, my mother called me within the week. She didn't ask how the job was going. She asked if I could start helping with her mortgage. "Just a little," she said, "just until she got back on her feet." I said yes. She never got back on her feet. Or maybe she did and just didn't tell me. By the time I was 25, I was sending her $1,500 a month. By 28, it had crept up to $2,400. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself it was what good daughters do. My boyfriend at the time told me it wasn't sustainable, and I got defensive, and we broke up over it, which I now understand was less about the money and more about the fact that I couldn't hear the truth yet. My brother never contributed. My mother never asked him to. He was the baby, she'd say. He was still finding himself. He was sensitive. I was not sensitive, apparently. I was capable, and capable people pay. Over 11 years, I calculated it once, sitting at my kitchen table with a glass of wine and a spreadsheet I immediately closed and didn't open again for 6 months. I had given my mother approximately $312,000. Some of it she'd asked for directly. Some of it came in the form of her telling me about a problem, the roof, the car, the credit card, and me solving it before she had to ask twice, because that was easier than the guilt. The guilt was its own currency. My mother was expert at it. I got a significant promotion at 30. Project director. Real money for the first time. I let myself dream a little, a down payment on a condo maybe. A trip I'd been putting off. I told my mother about the raise on a Sunday phone call, which was a mistake. Within 3 weeks she had a list. She wanted to move into a nicer apartment. She wanted new furniture because the old stuff was embarrassing. She wanted to take my brother on a vacation because he'd been going through a hard time. She mentioned almost casually that she'd always wanted to visit Italy. I said I'd help with the apartment. I said no to Italy. She didn't speak to me for 2 weeks. When she called back, she didn't mention the silence. She just picked up the conversation like nothing had happened. And I let her, because that was how it always worked between us. I was good at pretending things were fine. I'd had a lot of practice. The promotion came with a brutal travel schedule. I was flying somewhere almost every week. Client meetings, site visits, presentations. I was exhausted in a way that felt like it lived in my bones. I started getting migraines. My doctor told me to slow down. I told her I would and didn't. The week everything broke open, I was in the middle of a 3-city trip. I'd flown in from Dallas that morning, had a 2-hour meeting, and was supposed to catch a train to Philadelphia by evening. It was raining. I hadn't slept more than 5 hours in 4 days. I was crossing an intersection near the office, on foot, rushing because I was late, when a car ran the light. I remember the sound more than anything. A wet, percussive crack. The feeling of being lifted. and then the pavement, which was cold and wet, and surprisingly close to my face. I broke my left arm in 2 places. I fractured 2 ribs. I had a concussion significant enough that the ER doctor spoke to me very slowly, like he wasn't sure the words were landing. I kept asking him what day it was. He kept answering patiently, and I kept forgetting. They admitted me. The hospital was loud and bright, and I couldn't get the lights to dim all the way. I had my phone, which a nurse had retrieved from my bag. I called my mother. She answered on the 4th ring. I told her what happened. I tried to keep my voice steady. I told her I was in the hospital, that I had a broken arm and fractured ribs, that the concussion was being monitored, that I was alone. I asked if she could come. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Oh, sweetheart, you know your aunt's retirement party is this weekend." I thought I'd misheard her. What? We've had it planned for months. There are going to be 60 people there. Your brother is helping with the setup. She paused. It's not like you're in surgery. I stared at the ceiling of my hospital room. It had a small water stain in one corner shaped vaguely like a hand. I have a concussion, Mom. Concussions go away, she said. You just have to rest. You're in good hands there. That's what hospitals are for. She told me to keep her posted. She told me to drink water. She said she'd call me Sunday night after the party and we'd catch up properly. Then she said goodbye and hung up. I held the phone against my chest for a long time. The monitor next to my bed beeped at steady intervals. A nurse came in to check on me, and I told her I was fine. She didn't look convinced, but she left me alone, which was what I needed. My brother called an hour later. I thought briefly that maybe she'd told him what happened, and he was calling to say he was coming. Instead, he wanted to know if I could Venmo him $400 before the weekend because he needed new shoes for the party and was a little short. He mentioned my accident briefly. Mom told me, "That sucks, hope you feel better," and then got back to the shoes. I told him I'd think about it. I didn't send the money. I lay in that hospital bed for the rest of the night, thinking about what it would mean to actually stop. I'd been thinking about it in the abstract for years. Every therapist I'd ever half-heartedly seen had gently suggested that the financial arrangement with my mother was not healthy, that I was enabling dependency, that I was allowed to have limits. I always nodded and then went home and paid her rent anyway. But something about the ceiling of that hospital room, that hand-shaped water stain, the beeping monitor, the fact that I had been hit by a car and my family was at a party, made the abstract feel very concrete. I had a friend from college who had moved to my city 2 years before, Tess. She was no nonsense in a way I'd always admired, and sometimes found exhausting. She was the one person I'd been genuinely honest with about my family, mostly because she'd cornered me once at a dinner and refused to let me deflect. She'd listened to the whole thing and then said, very quietly, "You know this isn't normal, right?" I'd told her I knew. I called her from the hospital at 10:30 at night. She picked up immediately. I didn't say anything at first. She waited. "My mom didn't come," I finally said. A pause. "Where is she?" "Her sister's retirement party." Another pause, longer this time. "Okay," she said. "I'm coming. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. That's not the point." I could hear her in the background, moving around what sounded like keys. "What's the room number?" She was there by midnight. She didn't make a big deal of it. She brought me a terrible vending machine sandwich and a bottle of water and sat in the vinyl chair next to my bed and just stayed. We talked a little, and then we didn't. And somewhere around 2 in the morning I fell asleep with the lights still on. In the morning she brought coffee from a place down the street, and while I was drinking it she said, "I want to ask you something, and I need you to actually answer." I said, "Okay, how long are you going to keep doing this?" I knew what she meant. I looked at the coffee cup. I said, "I don't know." "That's honest," she said. "It's a start." She stayed with me for 2 days. She coordinated with my office so I didn't have to make those calls. She helped me figure out what I needed for when I got home, the prescription, the follow-up appointments, the fact that I couldn't drive for a week. She was practical in all the ways I was too foggy to be. And she did it without making me feel like a burden. My mother called Sunday evening, as promised. She said the party was wonderful. She asked how I was feeling. I told her I was still in the hospital, which seemed to surprise her slightly. She said she'd assumed I'd be home by then. I said I probably would have been if someone had been here. Silence. I didn't know it was that, she said. I told you I had a concussion and broken bones. Well, a pause. You always manage, I didn't think. She stopped. You're fine now though, right? I looked at Tess, who was pretending to read something on her phone and was definitely listening. Yeah, I said, I'm fine. I was discharged Monday morning. Tess drove me home, helped me get settled, and left me with her number underlined twice in a note on the kitchen counter that said, call me for anything. I mean anything. I sat in my apartment for the rest of that day doing nothing. No work, no phone calls, no checking my messages. I just sat. I thought about my mother. I thought about my brother and his $400 shoes. I thought about 11 years and $312,000 and a retirement party that was apparently worth more than their daughter lying in a hospital bed alone. I opened my banking app. I looked at the automatic transfer I had set up for my mother, $2,400, scheduled for the 15th of every month, no exceptions in 11 years. I looked at it for a long time, then I canceled it. I sat back and waited to feel something. Guilt, maybe, or the particular dread that had always accompanied any even theoretical thoughts of saying no to my family. Instead, I felt very quiet. Like a room after a loud noise finally stops. I didn't call my mother to tell her. I just let the 15th come and go. She called on the 16th. Her voice was controlled in the way it got when she was working toward something. My account is short, she said. I know, I said. The transfer didn't go through. I canceled it. A long pause. Willa, I was in the hospital, Mom. I was in the hospital and you went to a party. We've talked about this. No, I said. We really haven't. I've tried to talk about it and you've changed the subject or gone quiet for a few days until I apologize for bringing it up. That's not the same thing. She was quiet now in a different way, waiting to see which direction I'd go. I kept going. I've given you a lot of money over a lot of years because I love you and because I believed you needed it. And maybe some of it you did need. But I needed you last week, and you told me you had a party to go to. My voice was steady, which surprised me. I'm not sending the transfer this month. I don't know about future months. But right now, I can't. She started to say something about the lease, about the utilities, about how she hadn't planned for this. I told her I understood. I told her I loved her. And then I did something I had never done in 32 years. I ended the phone call before she did. I put my phone face down on the counter and made myself a cup of tea and stood at my kitchen window for a long time watching the street below. My brother called that night. He wasn't sympathetic the way I might have once hoped. He was upset, which I had expected, and he said things that stung, which I had also expected. He told me I was abandoning the family. He told me I was selfish for making this about one bad weekend. He told me Mom was really stressed. I let him talk. When he was done, I said, when the car hit me, I was in the intersection for 7 minutes before an ambulance came. I know because I watched the clock on a nearby building. Do you know what I thought about? He didn't say anything. I thought about whether anyone would come. I kept running through names in my head. Who could I call? Who would actually come? And I realized the list was very short. You weren't on it, by the way. Not because I don't love you, but because I knew. He hung up. I didn't hear from either of them for almost 3 weeks. Part of me expected to feel freer during that silence, and part of it did feel like breathing room, genuine and strange. But it also ached in a way that was hard to explain to people who didn't understand complicated families. The grief of losing something that was never actually yours, the mourning of a version of people who were never quite real. I told Tess all of this one evening, over takeout in my apartment. She listened without interrupting, which was a skill she had that I was still learning to receive without filling the space myself. When I was done, she said, "Can I tell you something?" I said yes. I've watched you for 2 years manage your family like a project at work, anticipating needs, solving problems before they escalate, making sure everyone else was okay. She paused. You're really good at it, but you were managing them, not being in a family with them, and you can't manage people into loving you the right way. I didn't say anything for a while. Then I said, That's annoyingly accurate, she smiled. I know. My father called me out of the blue about a week after that. My father and I were not close. We talked maybe 4 times a year, obligatory and a little awkward, aware of the distance between us without quite knowing how to close it. He'd heard about the accident from a cousin I hadn't thought to tell not to mention it. He asked how I was doing. I gave him the usual answer. He said, No, actually, how are you doing? I wasn't used to him asking. I told him the longer version, the hospital, my mother, the transfer, the 3 weeks of silence. I didn't know why I told him everything. Maybe it was just the timing, the fact that someone was asking, and I was finally too tired to summarize. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I owe you an apology. I wasn't expecting that. I left when you were 16, he said, and I told myself you were okay because you seemed okay. You were always so capable. I used that to convince myself I didn't need to look closer. He paused. That wasn't fair to you. You were 16. You shouldn't have had to be that capable. I didn't know what to do with that. I sat very still. Your mother loves you in the way she knows how, he said carefully. But she also learned a long time ago that you'd pick up whatever she dropped. And that's not a fair thing to teach a kid. Another pause. I should have seen it. I should have said something. I'm sorry I didn't. I pressed my palm flat against my kitchen table, feeling the wood grain. Why are you telling me this now? Because you're 32 years old and you're in your apartment, recovering from a car accident, and the people who should have been there weren't, he said. And someone should say it plainly to you, that's not your fault. None of it, I cried. I hadn't cried yet. Not in the hospital, not when my brother called, not in any of the 3 weeks since. But I cried then, quietly, on the phone with my father who I barely knew, because sometimes the kindness you've been waiting for comes from somewhere you weren't looking. We talked for another 2 hours. It was the longest conversation we'd had since I was maybe 12. He asked about my work, my life, what I actually liked doing on weekends. He told me about his garden, which I didn't know he had. He apologized twice more, which I didn't ask for but needed. Before we hung up, he said, I don't know if you want more of a relationship with me. I'd understand if you didn't, but if you do, I'd like that. I said I'd think about it. And I meant it as a real answer, not a deflection. My mother reached out again in the middle of the following month, not by phone this time, by email, which was unlike her. She wasn't much of a writer. The email was 3 paragraphs, and it was the most direct thing she'd ever said to me. She said she knew she'd let me down. She said she had been thinking about it for weeks. And she couldn't explain her choices in a way that made them okay, so she wasn't going to try. She said she was going to start talking to a therapist. Something she'd resisted for as long as I could remember. Because she understood, finally, that she had some patterns she needed to look at. She didn't ask me to resume the transfers. She didn't ask me to forgive her right away. She just said she was sorry and she loved me, and she'd be here when I was ready. I read it 3 times. Then I forwarded it to Tess with no comment. Tess texted back, she wrote that herself? I wrote back, that's what I'm trying to figure out. I didn't respond to my mother right away. I sat with the email for 2 weeks. I took it to a therapist of my own. One I'd started seeing after the hospital, something I'd been avoiding for years. And we talked about it for almost the whole session. What it meant, what I wanted it to mean, what I was afraid of. My therapist asked me, what would it look like to have a relationship with your mother that felt like enough? I said I didn't know. She said, that's okay. You don't have to know yet, you just have to not decide yet. I found that unexpectedly helpful. I wrote back to my mother eventually. I kept the email short. I told her I'd received her message and I was glad she was talking to someone. I told her I needed more time. I told her I loved her too. I did not resume the transfers. I sent her one amount, a smaller amount, one I'd chosen deliberately, one that I could give from a place of genuine choice rather than obligation or fear, and I wrote a separate note explaining that this was what I was able to do right now and that it wasn't a negotiation. She accepted it without comment. My brother and I have not spoken since that phone call. I don't know if we will soon. I've thought about reaching out a few times and stopped, not because I'm angry. The anger faded faster than I expected, but because I don't know what we'd say. We built our whole sibling relationship around a dynamic that I've now stepped out of, and I'm not sure what's underneath. Maybe nothing. Maybe something worth finding out. Tess and I got into the habit of having dinner together every other Wednesday. It started as a check-in while I was recovering and just kept going. She's the kind of friend who remembers what you said 3 weeks ago and asks about it, who doesn't let you get away with the abbreviated version of things. Last week she asked me if I regretted canceling the transfer. I thought about it honestly, which I'm trying to do more. No, I said. I regret that it took me getting hit by a car to do it. She nodded, like that was the right answer, sir. I'm still recovering in the ways that matter beyond the arm and the ribs. I've started being more careful about what I say yes to, not just with money, but with my time, my attention, the version of myself I show up as in a room. I've started noticing when I'm managing people versus actually being with them. I've started to understand the difference. Some days I'm better at it than others. Most days I'm still learning. My father texted me last Thursday. He said he'd made a good batch of tomatoes from his garden, and he didn't know what to do with all of them. He sent a photo of the tomatoes, lined up on his kitchen counter, unreasonably red and abundant. I texted back, "That's a lot of tomatoes." He sent back a laughing emoji, and then, "Come visit sometime. I'll make sauce." I looked at that message for a while, then I typed, "Maybe I will." I meant it. The car that hit me ran a red light at 4:47 on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. The driver had somewhere to be. I had somewhere to be. The intersection didn't care about either of us. What I know now, that I didn't know lying on that wet pavement, is this. The people who show up when you're on the ground. Not eventually, not when it's convenient, but right away, in the rain, at midnight, with a terrible vending machine sandwich. Those are the people you build your life around. Everything else is a negotiation you've been having with yourself.